Look, we're going to be spending the day together. We're going to be taking questions occasionally. I get to moderate a lot of this stuff. I call myself the occasional moderator. But they think the big thing is we've got an incredible lineup here today. Those of you who start this morning, come to the end. I wish I had a medal to give you, like at the end of a marathon, because it's going to be a little bit like that. But it's wonderful to see you. But joining me now on the stage, we're not going to waste time today. Please welcome to the stage Hans Vestberg, Chairman and CEO of Verizon, and Penny Pritzker, former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Pleasure to have you both here. Madam Secretary. Hans, great to see you.
Good seeing you.
So let me,
Okay.
you got
He
it.
took that here, that's fine.
Let me just start out. And I think one of my concerns, we're an IMF World Bank Week, the Bretton Woods institutions designed to think about global finance, the developing world, what's going on inside economies. And I've always thought in the many years that I've been on the fringes of these institutions and their work that they define too narrowly what a healthy economy ought to be. And it brought me, Hans, to the issue of connectivity, digital world, infrastructure. And so, if Hans Vestberg was the head of the IMF, how would you change it to think about healthy economy?
How long time do we have?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, first of all, I think connectivity, if we just backtrack a little bit, I've been for many, many years working in communication, connectivity, and I've seen the differences when people are connected. Basically, you're part of our society. You can have the equal chance if you're connected. If you're not connected, you don't have equal chance wherever you're born in the world. But if you're connected, you can actually have the same chance to get education, healthcare, being part of our society, doing financial banking and all of that. That's such an important thing for economy and growth, but also for educating people. Education is so important because ultimately, if we're educated, we're more friendly, we understand each other better, we can do better things, we can get jobs, growth. So start there. I think the 21st century's infrastructure is clearly mobility, broadband, and cloud.
So where are the connectivity deficits in America and the world?
So this is an interesting thing. Just listen to the facts. It's 3.2 billion people that is connected today on Earth. Okay, 3.2 billion. And it's roughly 2.8 billion that is not connected. But they have broadband coverage. And it's only 400 million people on this Earth that doesn't have broadband coverage. And now you look very puzzled. Yeah. Because what you think about when you think about broadband, you need to put it in three buckets. You need the accessibility to the technology, to the broadband. You need it to afford it. And it has to be something you can use that is really usable. So think about it that usually you have broadband around you, but you cannot afford it. And it's not only affording the service fee. You need a device. You need power. There's a lot of things around it. And finally, it should be usable, meaning a digital healthcare app. It has to be education that is digital. You should be able to do financial banking through a mobile phone or something like that. So I think the big work we need to do is constantly work with governments all around the world to think about accessibility, affordability, and usability. Accessibility today is actually 400 million, and that's really bad, of course, people that doesn't have broadband coverage. But we have a huge proportion of the world's population that has broadband coverage, that we just need to get them to use it and can afford it as well. And the majority of all broadband is private money as well. So think about the intersection. So the infrastructure build is to 95% private money. The affordability has to be a combination of private-public. Usability in the main part of the world, that's basically public, meaning healthcare, education is usually a public good.
Right.
So you need to find all these stakeholders together in order to do it. And that's what we're doing in the Edison Alliance that I'm heading up. Right. So it was a great question.
Well, I'm going to come back to that.
Yeah, I know, but it was
Secretary
such a good question.
I'm going to say Secretary Pritzker one time out of respect, but out of friendship and our relation, I'm going to say Penny because I can't stop that. But I want to say to our audience that Secretary Pritzker, Penny Pritzker, was of course our Secretary of Commerce under President Obama. 3 people ran up to me and to others that were here reminding us that the semiconductor program that had begun and initiated under President Obama. So a lot of our conversation today is going to focus on what equities does America need to get better than it did before. But I also want to remind people that you're a businesswoman with a multi-billion-dollar operation. You're well-heeled, in the kind of world of business. You know what's going on, and you have a sense, and you've got because you're also out there with your capital at risk. So you've been on both sides of the aisle. So I'd love to kind of first get a picture of the public policy penny saying, what does the semiconductor program, which you helped launch, mean? And what does America need to do to become more responsible in its investment vector? And then on the flip side of that, as a businesswoman, a major businesswoman in this country, are you worried about the future?
Two good questions. Well, on semiconductors, in 2015-16, the Department of Commerce and our team put together a report on the challenges that today are so well understood in terms of semiconductors. That report was largely ignored for a period of years, and then really when the Biden...
Who ignored it specifically?
Well, I'm just going to say it was largely ignored by American administrations until the transition into the Biden administration, where there was a big wake-up as to how dependent, if we want to do the connectivity that Hans is talking about, we all need access to semiconductors of all different types. And there's two issues in my mind around semiconductors. One is everything requires a semiconductor, every device that we use, including our toaster, if you will. And so but you need semiconductors also of different characteristics and complexities and functionality in order to do everything from things that our Defense Department does or that we do with our allies around the world to AI. How are we actually going to be able to bring AI to everyone, if you will, if we don't have that kind of silicon capability? That report really was the beginning of this effort that ultimately led to the CHIPS Act, which is a phenomenal beginning.
So before you tell us whether you're worried about the economy, Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC,
Yes.
gave Nancy Pelosi a lesson in industrial policy
Yes.
and said $50 billion, and he laughed. And he basically said, you guys aren't serious. Do you think America is serious? Are we just kind of looking as a checkbook? Are we even good at industrial policy?
I think it's an extremely important catalyst. I think that most of the investment actually is private sector investment. It's great that the companies want more public money, but frankly, this was sufficient catalyst to get the kind of construction going in the United States that we need. We need more. But let's get this done. And so I think that it's a good beginning policy. The United States doesn't do industrial policy, a lot of it, but we have done some in the last 18 months. And I think it's absolutely essential for us to stay competitive.
As a businesswoman looking into the future, worried?
There's a lot of things to be, optimistic about, but there's a lot of things to be concerned about. I think, frankly,
Start with the cynical list or
the cynical, the things
list,
to worry about. In the United States, well, first of all, globally, geopolitics is really fraught right now, right? There's a war going on that's very much of an important issue between authoritarianism and democracy, between self-rule and sovereignty and being invaded by another power. That's a huge issue that's having global ramifications across the world, not the least of which is around food and food security for many parts of our world, which is really troubling and scary for many families and causing inflation in places like Africa, Egypt, and other places, which is really concerning. If you come back to the United States, I think someone earlier in our breakfast said the United States is in the best position in the world, and that's a little troubling given I think we've got challenges in our economy. And I get the privilege of seeing it because we're investors and owners of businesses in technology and technology services, advanced industrials, real estate, hospitality. So we're kind of have a little bit of a view into a number of sectors across our economy. And frankly, everybody's struggling. It's not terrible, but it's not where we need to be in the sense that, but the problem is visibility going forward is quite uncertain. We've had Obviously, we're fighting inflation. The good news is I think the inflation numbers just came out, 0.1%, which is good because it seems to be lower than expectations, which is great. We need to keep seeing that come down because, frankly, I don't know that the economy can afford the Fed continuing on the path it's been on. It's been a very fast change. I think they were trying to catch up because they were slow to engage. But frankly, it's been very difficult for businesses to react. You see the banking challenges that have occurred. I think that's going to have a massive ripple effect as it relates to credit availability in real estate particularly. I think you're going to see a big disruption there. And then I think credit availability to small and medium-sized businesses. You know, the money center banks are plenty strong and are you know, they're well positioned. But I think that the regional and community banks are the banks that, frankly, are banking Main Street and you know, middle market companies, and I think they're really pulled in their horns. So lots to worry about, I think, but long term, you know, America's strong and resilient. We'll get through this, but I think we have more rocky road ahead of us for a while.
Thank you. Hans, you know, I had my eyes opened about technology connectivity in a way I was surprised by at a place I don't know if you go to called Mobile World Congress. I'd never been to Mobile World Congress, but 100,000 people go and they hang out at this extravaganza of all the tech that's coming in the future. Verizon had a great setup. I don't know if you saw it. It was fantastic. You know, you got to go.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, you got to go next year.
I've been there 15 times.
Listen,
I didn't go this year.
I will invite you to the Verizon Plaza.
Lovely.
And
I guess I know what it was.
When you go in there, I was walking, you know, by one of the 6 or 7 great halls of like packed tech of the future, and I ran into a guy named Alan Davidson. Alan is currently our head of the National Telecommunications Infrastructure Administration. And he said, Steve, no one's paying attention to us, but I got $50 billion, you know, also part of the Department of Commerce, but basically to wire America's unwired communities. And my understanding is we've done the geo-mapping. We know who's in, who's out. Let me just ask you, is this a conversation about, you know, Gail Manchin is a friend of mine who's the head of the Appalachian Commission and constantly looking at the land. What needs to happen beyond that money to connect Americans and communities that are not there? How can we make this a yesterday issue rather than a tomorrow issue?
Again, I go back to what I said in the beginning. In order to get people to be connected, you need accessibility technology. You need it to be afforded, and then you need usability.
Right.
And I think that in many cases we're falling down on the accessibility, if it's broadband or not.
Right.
When you're not putting the effort on, can these low-income families afford it?
Right.
Can they have a device? Can they have a computer? I mean, sometimes you fall in the trap to say, hey, as long as broadband we're gonna have people using it. That's not the case. I worked with all the 193 countries in the world, and I know you need much more. You need intervention from the government. You need different type of applications that are healthcare, education, that is really meaningful for because ultimately you want that in order to have a growing economy. You have some fun stuff as well. You have gaming and streaming service, which is great, but now I'm talking about growing the GDP of a country and seeing that everybody in the country have the same chance. I think that's, I mean, you talk about the 50 billion, just to get the parallel as we talked before, the telco companies in this country spend 90 billion a year in infrastructure. We spent last year $24 billion in the United States in networks. So that's what we do every year.
So America has a penny in the bucket.
Of course, there are always pockets where we need more broadband. There's no debate about that. But we all the time need to think more holistically when we want to have people.
Let me put you on the spot on something. So you mentioned Edison Alliance, and I would love you to tell our audience about the Edison Alliance, which involves other companies like MasterCard and others.
Yes.
And to talk about, it's not just financial inclusivity and connectivity, it's basically human connectivity and telecommunications, et cetera. Tell us about it, but I think the other part of that is, as you look at these other nations that you're working with, developing nations in particular, that are hungry to solve the affordability, accessibility, and usability dimensions, who's hungrier than we are? Who's getting it?
No, I think the US is doing a great job, so I'm not saying that. But it's just that I want this holistic thinking, and that's where I also came in. I mean, I fought for a long time, some of you know the SDGs, I fought for a long time to have a goal 18, that every citizen in the world should be able to be connected. We all know it's 17, so I lost. So when we came into the pandemic, and I saw the enormous importance to being connected, to do your work, to be part of our society, to get healthcare where you couldn't go around, I said, now it's time to make goal 18 again. I failed again, but I went to the World Economic Forum, which I think is the biggest multilateral platform in the world, and I said that why don't we do a program with private, public companies to bring the best of the best and commitment from all of us. And we decided for a goal of 1 billion people being connected the next 5 years, but only being connected either to healthcare, education, or financials, not that they only have broadband. We have many companies and countries connected right now in it. The first report we reported out of the 2 years, we actually have achieved half of it, 450 million people being connected the last 2.5 years. We still have a couple of years more to do. We want to measure it. We want to measure all the initiatives. So that's what we're doing. And again, it's more about learning from and all countries have different challenges. I mean, if you go to Africa, they have a hard time to do coverage out in the rural areas because there's no power grid. So it's very costly to run it on diesel. It's not even healthy. So there's a lot of different challenges, different countries. We see more and more countries doing subsidies and building applications for their citizens that are for global good or for common good for the citizens. So I think that there are many countries actually doing great things at the moment. We're still not there. We should be there when everybody is connected that want to be connected.
Thank you, Penny. Let me ask you a geopolitical, geoeconomic question. Right now, the United States is doing about $750 billion of bilateral trade with China each year. But the word that is probably, the new drinking word is decoupling. If America decoupled from China, what happens?
Well, I think this is a real challenge and a problem for
China or us?
I think for the world.
Yeah.
And because, frankly, the two largest economies in the world need to engage with one another. Plus, it's dangerous. I mean, what's happening is, first of all, we need to start just talking. We need our governments talking to one another. We stopped doing that in the last 4 or 5 years, and that's extremely dangerous.
You know President Biden pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Have you told him that?
We've had these conversations. What I would say is yeah, look, I think the U.S. government wants to be in dialogue with China. I think China wants to be in dialogue with the United States. I think they realize this escalation is very dangerous, but it's sort of like things keep interfering, whether it's balloons or TikTok or language that's being used by various countries. But we need to set all that aside and find a way back to talking to one another. When I went into government, I kept saying to myself, what is this whole dialogue thing? Why do we dialogue? Sometimes we get together and nothing happens. It's like a lot of words, but nothing happens. But one of the things I learned is that when you dialogue, you're not shooting each other. You're not killing each other. You're actually working on something together. We need to get back to talking, and as opposed to really threatening serious military action between the two countries. And so, to me, decoupling is very scary. And what I see happening for American companies and American institutions that are doing business both here and in China is they're getting pressure from the U.S. government not to do business in China. They're getting pressure from the Chinese government about, what are they doing and are they doing enough in China? And it's, to me, I think, it's like you can't win for trying. And what is going to happen is at some point, American business is going to look at itself and say, it's not worth it. Or I can't afford to be active in both places. I'm going to have to pick. That isn't good for the world.
Right. So
we need to stay more engaged.
Right.
And I've always believed, just one more sentence, I've always believed that commercial engagement and those ties are helpful for the fabric of the world.
Look, in a few minutes, we're going to have the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai up here, and I may not ask her about this, but I just think there's an interesting question. Hans, I know that you're a hardcore businessman. You believe in business, you know technology, you were CTO at Verizon. I guess, my lexicon of learning about how economics work is that you've got to worry about a protectionist direction, because those that get protected becomes less competitive, and those that are not, competing, is that formula being rewritten today? Do we need to worry, particularly in the tech sector? How do you de-risk the tech sector without creating essentially an environment in which the technology companies become less competitive over time globally?
No, I think that if we just take a decade back, the importance of resilience, network, resilient technology is so important, because everything we do today is connected to technology. And of course, with cyber crimes and cyber security, this becomes even more important. How you build a network, how you think about the privacy of the data, and all of that. That is just gone totally different the last 10 years. And the importance of building network with this resilient and thinking about all of this. I mean, Verizon, of course, we are the biggest direct.
But to be interrupted, do analysts of Verizon stock reward you or punish you for resilience? Because
yes,
analysts used to punish for resilience.
No, not when it comes to resilience of a network. No. That's one of the most important qualities we have. I mean, Verizon's network has always been ranked number one in the United States, and that's why many in this room hopefully are using Verizon. Usually 50%. Thank you.
Verizon. We're not going to pull that.
Don't pull that now. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be horrible when we go out. But.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important that both the data you're carrying on your phone as a consumer, or as a business, or as a government, and that the network is holding up all the time. So resilience is definitely, at least in my industry, is one of the most important things we have, to see that we have a secure, resilient network. We take care of the privacy for our customers when it comes to our data. So I think that's something we invest very heavily and will continue to do so, because that's our trademark.
Penny, one of the frames I used to think about globalization is really talking about high trust networks. Higher trust networks moved money, people, ideas, institutions more frictionlessly across borders. We're still all connected, but it sort of seems to me like we have high fear networks, like there's consequences of connectivity. How do you get trust back and ratchet fear down?
I think you have to engage, not run away from each other. I think it's more important that you actually sit down and confront the challenges and begin to put the humanity back in the engagement, rather than become you're about your rhetoric and you're about your polarization and you're about, your differences. Because at the end of the day, that's not good for the world. It's not good for Americans. So I'm a believer about, you have to keep engaging. And I think one of the challenges we face is our country is pulling away from that engagement in different ways. And I think that one of the opportunities, a place to engage, is around standards. We have one of the great organizations in the country called NIST, and there's all of this technology that's happening. We should be engaging around standards, engaging around new technologies, talking the global threats and opportunities of new technologies exist everywhere. I think that's a place of common ground.
Real quickly, Hans, last question. Later today, we're going to have the ambassador of Ukraine here, who is the former Minister of Finance. We're going to have the Minister of Finance of Jordan, Minister of Finance of Rwanda. These are all nations under stress, struggling, etc. What is the best advice you can give them on how to get the connectivity part right?
No, I think first of all, engage with the private sector on the technology side, which means that seeing that they get incentives to invest in the country, and then I think about how to connect their society, both to give them the right information, what's happening in the country, but also giving them the services that all citizens deserve in these times. So get the same chance that I was given when I was born. I want every citizen on the world to have.
Well, thank you. Well, Hans Vestberg, Chairman and CEO of Verizon, thank you very much. Former Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, Head of PSP Partners, thank you both so much.